We've now looked at classes, but we need to ask ourselves the most important question that we should ask ourselves about all ES6 features. When will we actually use classes, right? When are we going to actually use them? In practice, JavaScript's community has made a huge embrace of classes. So you'll see a ton of libraries moving towards the use of classes. Whereas a lot of other features in ES6, like template strings, destructuring, and so on, were kind of nice additions to the language that made writing code a little bit easier. Classes have dramatically changed the way that we write code. A lot of this is because it used to be so hard to set up proper prototypal inheritance, whereas it's far easier with the class keyword and the extends keyword. So let's look at this in practice. Besides teaching ES6, as I am right now, I also teach a lot on how to use a very popular JavaScript framework called React. React is used to generate HTML to show on the screen, to show, give our users something to interact with. And as a matter of fact, the tool that we're using right now is built using React. When working with React, you create individual components, which are objects that take some amount of data and produce some HTML. Now, when React first came out, the idea of using prototypal inheritance all over the place to create a component was considered laughable, just because there's so much setup you have to do whenever you're creating a subclass or something that inherits from another object. Instead, to create a component, we would use what is called the create class helper. And so this is a part of React. This is very specific, but I just want to show you an instance of where some existing library migrated towards using classes. So it used to be the case that with React, we had this helper called create class, and you would pass in an object, and it might have a method like do something and do something else, or whatever else there might be. So this was, not the worst thing in the world with the create class syntax, but it definitely made it really hard whenever you wanted to kind of subclass a component, or create a component that had some amount of behavior and then reuse it somewhere else. These days, React has migrated towards using the class syntax instead. So to create a component with React these days, or with the more modern syntax, we would instead write something like class my component extends component. And then we might have a method of, do something and do something else. And so the benefit of this approach is that if I made some very generic component that I wanted to reuse in other places of my code base, I can do so much more easily with the class-based approach, as opposed to using this, a little bit weirder create class syntax. You'll also notice that in this case, the inheritance chain is much more obvious. So this component keyword is a generic component that is provided by the React library. And so we're kind of going a little down the rabbit hole here with React, but essentially this component object right here is something that's provided by the React library. And so anyone who glances at this class right here can very easily say, okay, they are creating a component and it borrows a bunch of functionality from aha component, of course. The benefit to this is that if you're a fan of object-oriented programming and work with React, the class syntax is generally easier to work with than the older create class syntax. Okay, so with a better idea of how classes work and a little bit of understanding of where we'll see classes in the wild, let's continue on to the next section and get some more hands-on experience with some exercises.